What if aging wasn't natural, but a design flaw waiting to be fixed? That question pulsed through the screen as the YouTube video autoplayed on John Mather's old laptop. He leaned back in his recliner, an untouched TV dinner growing cold on the tray beside him, and let out a tired exhale. His living room, dim and quiet, smelled faintly of arthritis cream and old leather. The windows were closed, the blinds drawn, but his thoughts were loud. It had been 3 months since the fall. One moment he was reaching for a can of soup in the grocery store, the next, he was waking up in a hospital bed with a shattered hip and a lecture from his daughter. The worst part wasn't the pain. It wasn't even the walker they sent him home with. It was the silence that followed. The silence that made him feel like the world had already moved on, as if he had expired quietly, like milk gone sour in the back of a fridge. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from, the voice in the video said cheerfully. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? John clicked pause. He didn't need motivation. He needed mobility. He needed answers. But most of all, he needed to feel like a man again. At 68, John had lived several lives. Vietnam vet. Aerospace engineer. Widower. Father. A damn good one, until things got complicated. Until grief and work and distance built a canyon between him and Emily. She called on holidays and checked in after the fall, but every conversation felt like a polite obligation. Now, the only visitors were the pharmacy delivery guy and the occasional neighbor dropping off baked goods he didn't eat. His life had shrunk to the size of his front porch, and even that felt like too far a walk some mornings. Until that email arrived. Subject line. You've been selected, Neuromuscle Longevity Initiative, confidential. From, Musk Labs at encryptedmail.net. He thought it was spam. Probably some scam trying to sell supplements to gullible old folks. But curiosity got the better of him, like it always did. The message inside was short, clinical, and oddly compelling. Mr. John Mathers. Based on your background, genetic profile, publicly available via past VA testing, and recent health data, you've been pre-qualified for a pioneering clinical program designed to reverse age-related muscle decline. Developed by Neuromuscle Labs, an experimental branch supported by Elon Musk's private biotech initiative, this program utilizes advanced nutrition genetic protocols with early evidence of 89% muscle recovery in subjects aged 65+. If you are interested, we ask only one thing. Show up. Transportation provided. All costs covered. Location, Austin, Texas. Duration, 90 days. He didn't tell Emily. He didn't tell anyone. Maybe he wanted it to be a scam, because if it wasn't, then everything he knew about aging, about weakness, about fate, was wrong. 2 days later, he was standing at the curb outside his house, clutching a small duffel bag and a folder labeled medical records, confidential. A sleek black Tesla Model X pulled up, no driver in sight. The gull-wing door rose like a spaceship. He hesitated. This is stupid, he muttered under his breath. Then he stepped inside. The drive was smooth, silent, and oddly personal. The onboard screen flashed his name. Welcome, Mr. Mathers. Estimated time to arrival, 3 hours 22 minutes. He tried to ask questions. Who's behind this? Why me? What's in it for them? But the car didn't answer. It just hummed across the Texas interstate like a shadow in motion. At one point, a new message popped up on the screen. You don't have to believe yet. You just have to walk through the door. E.M. John stared at it for a long time. The facility looked nothing like a hospital. Nestled in the hills outside Austin, it resembled a luxury wellness retreat crossed with a NASA command center. Clean lines, glass walls, people in white coats walking briskly between labs and lounges. He was greeted by a soft-spoken assistant named Carmen, who scanned his face and welcomed him like a VIP. "Mr. Mathers, we're honored to have you." "Don't get ahead of yourself," John grunted. She smiled. "You might be surprised." He was shown to a small but comfortable room. Inside was a biometric bed, a tray of neatly labeled food samples, and a single card on the desk. In bold, embossed letters. "The Musk Protocol. 3 foods. 90 days. Your second life begins now." Underneath were 3 vials, amber, silver, and jet black, each filled with a fine powder. Golden lentil extract. Omega soy mycelium. Black turmeric compound. He didn't know what the hell any of that meant. But somehow, he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going back. That night, he stared out the window of his private room, watching the Texas sky stretch wide and unforgiving. He remembered being 19, flying helicopters over the Mekong Delta, thinking he'd never live to see 30. He remembered holding Mary's hand the day she passed, promising he'd keep going even if it hurt. He remembered holding baby Emily in a hospital room with walls the color of hope. And now? Now he had nothing left to prove, but everything to fight for. John Mathers wasn't sure what lay ahead in this protocol, or whether Elon Musk was a genius or a madman. But deep inside, past the scars and stiffness and stories he never told, something was waking up. Something hungry. John Mathers didn't sleep that first night at the facility. Maybe it was the silence. Thick and heavy, like the air before a storm. Maybe it was the hum of technology embedded in the walls, or the faint scent of ozone from the lab just down the hall. But more than anything, it was the gnawing, familiar ache in his right hip, the reminder of the fall that had started this whole journey. At 2:17 a.m., he rolled onto his back and stared at the ceiling. He remembered the first time he truly felt weak. Not tired. Not sore. But weak, helpless. It was 2 years ago. He'd been lifting a bag of mulch in the backyard when something in his shoulder snapped. He dropped it mid-lift and crumpled to the grass. His neighbor, Tyler, a guy half his age with a beer gut and no muscle tone, came running over and said, "You all right, man?" John said he was fine. He wasn't. That was the moment he realized his body was no longer listening to him, like a car engine misfiring at every command. The veteran in him hated that feeling. The engineer in him despised it. And the man in him had quietly begun to give up. By morning, he was dressed and waiting at his door before the knock even came. "Good morning, Mr. Mathers," said Carmen, clipboard in hand, her tone as bright as ever. "We'll be heading into orientation. Dr. Navarro will be leading the first session." He raised an eyebrow. "That the boss?" "She's the brains," Carmen replied, then winked. "You'll see." The main orientation hall was part science lab, part Apple keynote stage. Sleek, minimalist, with a massive curved display behind the podium. About 30 other participants had gathered, a mix of men and women between the ages of 65 and 80. Some looked alert and strong. Others leaned on canes, walkers, or aids. Most looked skeptical. John noticed a woman in her late 60s with a bright pink buzz cut. She smiled at him and said, "Bet you're wondering if this is real or some Elon-fueled hallucination." "Both," John said. "I've been in weirder places." A quiet chuckle. "I'm Frankie. Retired firefighter. 2 hip replacements." "You?" "John. Ex-military. Aerospace engineer." "Figures," she said. "You've got that I miss order and hate yoga energy." Before John could respond, the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage. A woman stepped forward, no lab coat, no flashy entrance. Just confident steps and fierce clarity in her eyes. "Good morning. I'm Dr. Lily Navarro," she said. "And if you're here, it means your life is about to change." She was maybe mid-40s, Latina, with a precise voice and a no-nonsense attitude that made the room sit up straighter. "You've all been selected not because you're the weakest," she said, "but because your data shows your systems still respond. We're not offering miracle drugs or longevity fads. We're running an experiment grounded in biogenetic nutrition, designed by the smartest people I know, and backed by the one guy crazy enough to fund it without red tape." She tapped a button. The screen behind her lit up, a 3D animation of a human muscle fiber degenerating with age, then regenerating. "This is sarcopenia. Age-related muscle loss. It starts in your 30s. By the time you're 70, you've lost nearly half your muscle mass, unless you're one of the rare few who actively fought it. And even then, biology usually wins." She clicked again. Now the screen showed gene expressions lighting up after exposure to certain food compounds. "Until now." Murmurs filled the room. John leaned forward, heart ticking faster. "These 3 compounds," she continued, "when consumed in precise microdoses, switch on dormant gene pathways responsible for muscle regeneration, metabolic flexibility, and inflammation control. The foods you were introduced to, golden lentil extract, omega soy mycelium, and black turmeric compound, are part of what we call the Musk protocol." Someone in the back raised a hand. "So this isn't like protein powder?" Lily smiled. "Protein shakes don't modify your DNA." After the presentation, the group broke into smaller cohorts. John was placed in cohort B, along with Frankie, a former history professor named Wallace, and a silent man with a prosthetic leg named Chris. Their cohort leader was a young researcher named Jonah, maybe 25, nerdy, kind, and visibly terrified of all of them. "Day 1's easy," Jonah said. "Vitals, baseline strength test, and your first microdose. Then you rest." Frankie muttered, "So basically the worst first date ever." John's baseline test was humbling. He could barely push 30 pounds on the seated leg press, and his grip strength registered below average for his age group. As a man who once bench-pressed parts of rocket engines, it felt like a punch to the gut. Jonah didn't judge. "Most people improve 25% in the first 2 weeks." John nodded but didn't respond. He didn't want 25%. He wanted fire. That night, after his first dose, a bitter mix of all 3 compounds blended into a gel, John stared into the bathroom mirror. The lights were clinical, too honest. He didn't recognize the man in the reflection. Slumped shoulders. Weathered skin. Eyes that looked like they'd watched the world forget him. He thought of Mary. Of her last smile. Of the way her hand went limp in his, and how he swore he'd never let life just flatten him. But he had. Somewhere along the way, he folded in on himself. Shrinking. Quietly. "This place won't fix that," he said aloud. "That's on you." The words hung in the air. And for the first time in years, he believed them. The second morning at Neuromuscle Labs didn't feel like a fresh start. It felt like being thrown into a storm with no map. John woke up before sunrise, muscles aching in places he hadn't felt in years. His body wasn't just sore, it was confused, like it had rebooted in a different operating system. He rolled his neck, wincing, then reached for the bottle of water by his bed. Beside it sat a sealed packet, the morning microdose. This time, it wasn't a gel. It was a capsule, black, matte, and dense like something forged in a science fiction lab. Black turmeric compound, neural resilience and cellular regeneration. He stared at it for a long moment, then downed it with a swig of water. Bitter. Immediate. 10 minutes later, his fingertips were tingling. In the common area, the mood had shifted. More people were talking, quietly, cautiously. Frankie waved him over to a table near the smoothie bar, where Wallace and Chris were already seated. "Weird dreams last night?" she asked as John sat down. John nodded. "Felt like I was underwater, but awake. Couldn't move. Wallace sipped his beet-colored smoothie. That's the mycelium. It interacts with sleep cycles. Rewrites how your brain processes REM stages. Frankie raised a brow. And you know that because I read the white papers before I came. I don't trust Elon Musk with blind faith. I trust data. Chris, silent as ever, gave a single nod of agreement. John glanced around the room. Anyone else notice the cameras? Frankie followed his gaze. High in the corners of the room, tucked between the lighting panels, were black glass domes. Watching. Recording. Always. They say it's for safety, Wallace murmured. But this isn't just a test. It's a demonstration. John was about to ask what he meant when Carmen approached with a sealed envelope. Paper, not digital. Cream-colored with thick embossed lettering. Mr. Mathers, she said. You've been invited to a private session. John raised an eyebrow. What kind of session? She didn't smile this time. You'll want to see this. Room 12D was unlike anything John had seen at the facility. No windows. No screens. Just one long table, a pitcher of lemon water, and a single man waiting at the end of the room, arms crossed, posture military straight. He looked young, maybe mid-30s, but his eyes were the kind that belonged to someone who'd seen too much. Mr. Mathers, the man said. My name is Declan. I'm part of the Applied Results Unit, ARU for short. John stayed standing. Is this about the tests? Declan gestured to the chair across from him. It's about potential. John sat slowly. Declan placed a tablet on the table and tapped it. A 3D model of John's body appeared, rotating slowly, overlaid with glowing lines, red zones, and green progress markers. Your numbers are off the charts for day 2. Muscle enzyme uptake. Mitochondrial activity. Blood oxygenation. You're reacting faster than any subject we've had. John frowned. Is that good? Declan leaned forward. It's unheard of. John didn't trust compliments. Not when they came with strings. So what do you want from me? He asked flatly. Declan smiled, not kindly. Nothing, yet. But we're watching. Tracking. Every subject here was chosen for a reason. Some for biology. Some for behavior. You're both. He tapped the screen again. A still image filled the frame, John in the gym yesterday, mid-lift. His face contorted, veins bulging, legs trembling. We've analyzed footage of your lifts. You push past pain in ways that override self-preservation. That's military wiring. But what fascinates us is the why. John narrowed his eyes. You're profiling me. Declan didn't blink. We're understanding you. There's a difference. Silence fell. Then Declan slid a small black keycard across the table. If you want real answers, go to sublevel 3 at 2 a.m. tonight. Use this. Don't tell anyone. John stared at the card. What's down there? Declan stood. Not everyone here is just getting stronger. Some are changing. That night, John tossed in bed, heart racing. The card lay on the nightstand, next to his prosthetic reading glasses and a picture of Emily as a toddler, the only photo he'd brought. He hadn't spoken to her in over a week. She still thought he was in physical therapy rehab. A white lie to save her the worry. But now, he wasn't sure if this was therapy or something closer to evolution. At 1:58 a.m., he got dressed in silence. He slipped into the hallway like a ghost. No security. No alarms. Just the endless hum of systems working in the background, walls breathing with quiet power. Sublevel 3 wasn't on the map. But the elevator responded instantly when he swiped the black card. As it descended, the numbers on the display turned red. 3, 2, 1, 0. -1. -2. -3. The doors opened. The hallway was darker, cooler, and lined with thick glass observation windows. Inside one room, a woman in her 70s was running on a treadmill. Sprinting, her eyes wide, electrodes on her temples glowing blue. In another room, a man lifted a barbell twice his size. His arms trembled violently, but he didn't stop. A researcher beside him took notes while whispering into a headset. Further down the hall, John paused at a door marked, Restricted, Tier 3 Neuromuscular Adaptive Trials. Behind the glass, a figure floated in a tank, submerged in thick green fluid, arms outstretched, chest rising and falling rhythmically. Dozens of wires connected to the figure's head and spine. John leaned closer. It was an older man. And he was smiling. John stumbled back, heart hammering. He didn't know what this was anymore. An experiment? A miracle? Or something else entirely? As he turned to leave, he caught his own reflection in the glass. But for the first time, he didn't recognize the man looking back. By 6 a.m., John was back in his room, but he hadn't slept. He couldn't. Not after what he'd seen in Sublevel 3. He kept seeing the floating man in his mind. The way he smiled like he was in on some cosmic secret, as if pain, time, and gravity no longer applied to him. John had seen people survive near-death situations before, in combat, in hospitals, but he'd never seen someone look reborn. He didn't tell anyone. Not Frankie. Not Wallace. Not even Jonah. He carried the black keycard in his sock, close to his skin, like a soldier keeping a lucky charm before deployment. And when the official Musk protocol began later that morning, John was ready in a way no one else could be. Cohort B was led into the biotech training wing just after breakfast. This wing wasn't open to the general participants. Everything here was pristine and surgical, brushed steel, glass, and white polymer floors that responded to footsteps with a soft light glow. On the wall in bold silver lettering. Strength isn't just muscle. It's memory. It's code. Rewrite it. Jonah greeted them with an energy John hadn't seen before. Today, he said, we enter phase 1 of the Musk protocol. He passed each of them a slim wristband. Matte black. No screen, no buttons, just a barely visible Tesla logo etched into the surface. These will track everything. Bioelectric responses. Neural spikes. Recovery curves. Even mood fluctuations. Wallace raised a hand. What do we get in return? Jonah smiled. Feedback. Acceleration. And access. The session began with controlled resistance movements, deceptively simple but precisely measured. Participants used specialized machines that adjusted resistance dynamically, adapting every second to the user's fatigue. Golden lentil extract is already affecting your recovery cycles, Jonah explained. It's rich in plant-based compounds that activate AMPK pathways. You'll recover 3 to 4 times faster than normal. John felt it. He should have been wiped after the first circuit. But instead, his body adjusted, slowly, but noticeably. Muscles didn't scream the way they used to. He didn't shake with fatigue. He focused, he breathed, and for the first time in years, he felt in control. Frankie, across the room, was bench pressing like a woman possessed. Didn't know retirement came with superpowers, she muttered. After the training, they moved into the recovery chamber, a low-lit room where participants sat in ergonomic pods while neural headbands delivered synchronized pulses to their brains. These weren't just for relaxation. According to Jonah, they helped lock in neuromuscular patterns the brain had forgotten how to fire properly. It's like teaching your body its own language again, he said. Only this time, it remembers faster. John leaned back in the chair and closed his eyes. For 20 minutes, pulses rhythmically tapped into his mind like fingers pressing piano keys. His muscles twitched involuntarily, just small spasms, but they felt good. Alive. He saw flashes behind his eyelids. Himself, younger. In the cockpit of a Huey. Laughing with his co-pilot. Clutching Mary's hand on their wedding day. Running with Emily on a beach in Galveston. It wasn't a dream. It was his body remembering how to feel again. After the session, Jonah handed out small metallic packets. Time for the midday dose, he said. Omega soy mycelium. This one's more than physical. It improves neuroplasticity and hormonal rebalancing. Don't skip it. John swallowed the dose. It tasted earthy, like dried mushrooms and iron. 10 minutes later, the world got sharper. Not brighter, not louder, but more present. He could hear the subtle difference in people's footsteps. The shift in Frankie's breathing. The hum of a charging panel. Even the taste of his saliva had changed, metallic, like electricity. Wallace grinned. Feels like my brain just got a tune-up. Jonah nodded. That's the mycelium. It's connecting things that forgot they belonged together. John asked the question quietly. How far does this go? Jonah paused. Then, carefully, as far as you let it. At lunch, John found a moment alone. He skipped the common dining hall and sat outside on a bench overlooking a small synthetic garden. The air smelled like mint and ozone. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, Declan was there. Enjoying the ride? Declan asked. John didn't answer right away. Then, why show me what's down there? Sublevel 3. Because, Declan said, you're one of maybe 4 people here who won't run from it. What is it? John asked. What are you doing down there? Declan sat beside him, elbows on his knees. We're exploring the edge. Where biology stops being a limit. Where the body and mind stop aging because they forget how. John shook his head. That's not how it works. We don't just flip a switch and stop time. No, Declan agreed. But sometimes, we rewrite the code. That night, John received a new packet under his door. This one was thinner, darker. Inside, a single line of text, written in stark red font. Phase 2 begins tomorrow. Prepare. No instructions. No names. No sender. Just a challenge. John held the card for a moment, fingers trembling slightly. And for the first time since Mary died, he felt something dangerous and alive wake up in his chest, something beyond survival or even hope. He felt drive. John hadn't expected the Musk protocol to push him this far, this fast. He woke up to a buzz in his wristband, a soft pulse that cut through the usual fog of sleep. A message flashed across the surface. Time to prepare. Phase 2 begins at 7 a.m. John had learned quickly that time didn't wait at neuromuscle labs. You moved when they told you to move, and you pushed harder than you ever thought possible. The cafeteria was different this morning. People were more focused, less chatty. Plates of food sat untouched on the tables as participants milled around, glancing at one another in wary silence. The usual energy was gone, replaced by a quiet tension, a feeling of inevitability. Frankie was the first to notice him. She gave him a tight smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Ready for the next round? She asked, pulling a protein shake from the counter. I guess I don't have much of a choice, John replied, sitting across from her. She nodded, swirling her drink. It's not just about muscle anymore, John. It's about control. About pushing your body until it breaks and then watching it heal. It's not normal. Tell me about it, John muttered. I don't know what's happening, but I don't feel like myself anymore. Frankie's eyes softened for a moment, but then they hardened again. You'll get used to it, We all will. The gym had been transformed. The usual machines and weight racks had been cleared out, replaced with sleek, futuristic equipment that John hadn't seen before. There were no dumbbells, no barbells, no rows of weights. Instead, long, silver columns stood at various heights, connected by a series of moving platforms and laser-like beams of light. Jonah stood at the front, his usual upbeat energy absent. His face was unreadable, eyes cold with focus. "Today is the beginning of Phase 2, he said. "You've all made progress, but now we're going beyond what your bodies think they can do. Beyond muscle. Beyond endurance." He paused, allowing the words to settle in. "Today, you will lift the unliftable." John exchanged a glance with Wallace. "The hell does that mean?" Jonah gestured toward the center of the room. A long, cylindrical object stood there, bathed in a soft blue light. The platform beneath it hummed with a quiet, pulsing energy. "This," Jonah said, "is the catalyst lift." At first glance, it didn't look like much, just a shiny, metal pillar rising out of a platform. But the sheer weight of it, the way it seemed to hum with an invisible force, told a different story. "Each of you will take turns trying to lift this," Jonah explained. "Not with traditional strength. But with neural strength." John frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means," Jonah said, his voice cold, "you'll push your brain and body to unlock a level of power you've never experienced. Not through brute force, but through reprogramming your limits." John's pulse quickened as his turn approached. He had no idea what Jonah was talking about. Neural strength. Reprogramming. It sounded like science fiction, and yet, here he was, about to face it head-on. Jonah tapped a control pad, and the catalyst lift began to glow brighter. The metal surface seemed to ripple, like the air itself was being altered around it. "Focus," Jonah instructed. "Forget everything you know about lifting. Clear your mind. Reach beyond your body's natural capabilities. Push yourself, but let go of the how." John swallowed hard, stepping toward the platform. He closed his eyes, trying to push aside the chaos in his head, the memories of sublevel 3, the strange changes in his body, the unease he couldn't shake. And then, it happened. He lifted. It wasn't an effort of muscle. It wasn't a struggle against gravity. It was as if the weight simply melted into his hands. He felt his body align in a way it never had before, as if every muscle and sinew were perfectly synced with the machine, as if his brain were orchestrating the movement, not his body. For a moment, it felt like time stopped. The world around him faded away. Then, a jarring sound, like a metallic clap, snapped him back to reality. The catalyst lift was no longer in his hands. It had just vanished. John stood there, staring at the empty platform. His body was trembling, but it wasn't from exertion. It was from disbelief. Jonah didn't seem impressed. "It's not about just lifting. It's about sustaining. Repeating it." John's heart hammered in his chest. "You want me to do that again?" Jonah smiled, but it was cold. "Yes. You'll keep doing it until it becomes second nature." For the next hour, they each took turns attempting the lift again and again, each time with more intensity. With each repetition, the results were more unpredictable. Frankie slammed the catalyst lift down with a grunt, her face twisted in concentration. But her hands were shaking. Wallace couldn't even get it off the ground the first few times. His face reddened as he pushed himself to the limit, only to be left gasping for breath afterward. But John. He was different. Each time, he got closer to understanding the neural pattern. Each time, it felt less like lifting and more like unlocking. By the end of the session, John was the only one who'd made it through all 10 lifts without failing. His body wasn't shaking anymore. He wasn't even tired. It was like he had tapped into a wellspring of energy, but he didn't know where it came from. Jonah approached him. You've done well, Mathers. But this is only the beginning. Tomorrow, we push further. The Musk protocol doesn't just change you physically. It changes you mentally. And once that shift happens, your body will follow. John swallowed hard. How much further? Jonah's eyes glinted with something almost predatory. Farther than you could ever imagine. The buzz in John's wristband woke him before the sun rose. Phase 3 begins. Prepare. It was the same cryptic message that had followed him all week, each morning offering a new challenge, a new test. But this time, there was something different in the air. The tension was thicker, and John could feel it creeping through the air like an electric current. As he stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his training gear, he stared at himself. His reflection looked different. He didn't know what it was exactly. His muscles were leaner, more defined. His eyes sharper. Even his posture had shifted subtly, more confident, more solid. But it wasn't just his body. His mind had started to change too. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and he could see the world around him in a new way. His focus had deepened. He could hear the smallest details, the hum of the fluorescent lights in the hallway, the squeak of rubber soles against the gym floor, the soft breathing of someone in the room next to him. The changes were unnerving. But at the same time, they gave him a sense of power he hadn't known before. Jonah stood at the front of the gym, waiting as the rest of the cohort filtered in. This time, he looked even more serious than usual, the light in his eyes a little colder, his posture straighter. Today is different, he said. Today, you will face the hardest challenge of the Musk protocol yet. But more importantly, today, you will be forced to confront your limits, not just physical, but mental and emotional. John raised an eyebrow. What's that supposed to mean? Jonah's lips curled into a faint smile. You'll see soon enough. He gestured to the center of the room, where 2 large pods were waiting. They looked like high-tech sleeping chambers, the kind you'd see in a sci-fi movie, smooth, silver, and sleek, with intricate designs that pulsed with a soft blue light. This is the neural decompression unit, Jonah continued. Inside these pods, you'll undergo what we call a mental recalibration. Recalibration? Wallace asked, his voice tinged with suspicion. What's that, exactly? It's a process where your mind is pushed to its limits. You'll experience intense cognitive challenges, your brain forced to rewire itself in real time. It's not just about lifting anymore. It's about overcoming mental blocks, rewiring your thinking patterns, and unlocking the potential that's lying dormant in your subconscious. Frankie shook her head. Are you saying we're going to be put in those things, and what, meditate? Think ourselves into strength? Jonah's smile was almost too calm. No. You'll be put inside. But you won't just be thinking. You'll be feeling. John had no idea what that meant, but as the other participants climbed into their pods, he felt an uneasy sense of anticipation crawling under his skin. His turn came last. He stepped into the neural decompression unit, the door sliding shut behind him with a soft hiss. Inside, the air smelled sterile, like metal and ozone. The soft blue lights above his head flickered, dimming until they were almost imperceptible. The chair he sat in was firm, but comfortable, cradling him as the restraints gently clicked into place around his arms and legs. A screen appeared in front of him, a glowing, translucent panel. Jonah's voice came through a speaker. Relax, John. This won't be easy, but if you want to continue, you must let go of everything you've known. The protocol will challenge you in ways you can't even imagine. The screen flickered to life, showing a series of images flashing by, memories, maybe, or simulations. John couldn't tell. Some were familiar, some were not. He saw flashes of his military service, the sound of helicopters in the air, the shouts of soldiers, the quiet whispers in the dark of the night. Then, he saw his family, Mary, smiling beside him at their daughter Emily's graduation, her hand holding his as they stood together in the church on their wedding day. But then, the images grew darker. He saw the wreckage of an accident. The cracked windshield, the twisted metal, the pale light of emergency responders. He felt the familiar weight in his chest. The heavy, suffocating grief. The loss. Then, suddenly, a new image appeared. One of himself, in the gym, lifting the catalyst lift without effort, his body moving with fluid grace, the muscles in his arms and legs firing in perfect synchronicity. He felt the power surging through him, the rush of energy, the pure strength. But then that image morphed. It twisted and changed, transforming into something else, something unrecognizable. The power didn't feel right anymore. It felt cold. It felt wrong. Push through it, Jonah's voice came through the speaker, cutting through the haze. Push through your fear, your doubt, your guilt. Face what lies beyond. Suddenly, John was there, back in that moment in the wreckage. He could feel the blood pounding in his ears, the sound of his breath rattling in his chest. His hand was outstretched, reaching for the twisted metal, searching for any sign of life. But then, in the next instant, that same hand was lifting the catalyst lift again, but this time, it felt effortless, weightless. Push through it. The world around him began to spin faster. His body tensed. The pressure of the neural decompression unit intensified, sending waves of heat and cold flooding through him in waves. He could feel his mind bending, snapping, breaking, but then he saw it. The bridge. The connection. His mental block shattered. He saw it, the understanding. It wasn't about physical strength anymore. It was about letting go of the limits in his mind, unlocking that dormant power, and accepting the changes happening inside him. The machine disengaged, and the restraints clicked free. John sat up, gasping for air. The room was still. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, but something had shifted. Something had changed. Jonah appeared at the door of the pod, his face unreadable. "Congratulations, John," he said, a glint of something strange in his eyes. "You've broken through." John's body hummed with energy as he stepped out of the neural decompression unit, still disoriented but somehow more alive than ever. His mind was racing, each thought coming faster than the last, as if the world around him had accelerated. The weight of his transformation settled in, but there was something else there, too, a deep, gnawing feeling that he couldn't quite place. Jonah stood at the door of the pod, arms crossed, watching him with an intensity that was almost predatory. There was no congratulation in his eyes, no warmth, just a cold, clinical look. "You've made it," Jonah said, his voice flat. "You've broken through your mental block, but you've only touched the surface. The Musk protocol is about transformation, on every level. Physical, mental, emotional." John nodded, trying to steady his breath, his mind still spinning from the experience. "But what's the point of all this?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "What's the end goal?" Jonah's eyes narrowed, and for a split second, John caught a flicker of something almost like satisfaction in them. But it disappeared quickly, replaced by his usual, calculating demeanor. "The end goal is a revolution, John," Jonah replied. "A revolution in how we think, how we push our bodies, how we age. Elon Musk didn't get where he is by sticking to the status quo. He pushed the boundaries of what was possible, and now, you're doing the same." John frowned. "But I don't want to be some test subject, Jonah. I didn't sign up for this to become a part of some experiment." Jonah's gaze turned sharper. "You think you have a choice now? You've crossed a line, John. You're beyond the person you were before you walked into this facility. Your transformation is inevitable. The question is, what will you do with it?" The words hit John like a punch to the gut, but there was a part of him, a small, rebellious part, that couldn't help but wonder if Jonah was right. He felt stronger than he ever had, more focused, more driven. He was different. But at what cost? Later that day, John found himself in the lab again, surrounded by the sterile, cold metal of neuromuscle's high-tech equipment. The air was thick with the scent of something faintly chemical, and the hum of machines filled the space. Frankie, as usual, was the first to greet him. "How are you feeling?" she asked, her voice cautious, almost sympathetic. John gave her a half-smile. "Like I've just been to the edge of my mind." "You?" She shook her head, her eyes distant. "I'm not sure I can keep doing this, John. It's too much. I mean, the physical stuff is one thing, but the mental exercises? It's like I'm losing myself." John understood exactly what she meant. There were moments when it felt like his thoughts weren't his own, when the pressure to keep going, to keep transforming, threatened to consume him. "I get it," he said softly. "But we're in this together, right?" She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded, though the uncertainty in her eyes was clear. "Yeah, I guess so." Later that afternoon, Jonah gathered everyone in the main hall, his expression grave. "It's time to take the next step," he announced, his voice echoing in the vast space. "You've all done well in the neural decompression unit, but now we're going to push your bodies even further." John's stomach twisted. "How?" Jonah smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "We're going to test your limits physically, but this time, we'll be combining the physical and neural aspects of the Musk protocol." John wasn't sure he understood, but the rising anxiety in his chest told him that the worst was yet to come. An hour later, they were back in the gym, facing yet another new machine. This one was even more intimidating than the catalyst lift, a massive contraption with pulleys, cables, and hydraulic arms designed to apply controlled force to different muscle groups. "This is the neural resistance trainer," Jonah explained, his voice echoing in the cavernous gym. "It combines resistance training with neural recalibration. You'll be tasked with lifting weights while your brain is subjected to challenging cognitive exercises." John felt a surge of unease. Lifting weights wasn't the hard part anymore, it was the mental strain. He had learned that the Musk protocol wasn't just about strength, it was about breaking down and rebuilding every part of you, every cell, every thought. The machine buzzed to life as Jonah began to demonstrate. It looked harmless enough, with the resistance bands stretching out on either side, but as Jonah took his position and started the test, the air shifted. His body tensed, sweat beading on his forehead. He began to shake, the strain visibly pushing him to his limits. But then, just as John thought he might collapse, the tension released. Jonah stood upright, his face flushed but determined. "You will all face the same challenge. But remember," Jonah added, locking eyes with each of them, "it's not just about pushing your muscles. It's about pushing your mind." John was the last to step up. He placed his hands on the machine, feeling the cool surface beneath his fingers, and took a deep breath. The resistance bands tightened around his arms, and the cognitive exercise screen flashed before him, demanding rapid answers to complex puzzles while the machine applied pressure. At first, it wasn't so bad. He pulled with ease, solving the puzzles as his mind worked like a well-oiled machine. But then, the pressure increased. The puzzles became more complex, the machine's resistance growing heavier with each completed task. His muscles screamed for relief, but his brain demanded more, faster, harder, more precise. His body began to shake. His mind started to blur the edges of reality, like a fog creeping in. He could feel the tension building in his chest, the desire to stop, to escape, to quit. But something else stirred inside him, a surge of determination, of willpower. "No," he whispered through clenched teeth. "Not this time." With a final push, he pulled the weight one last time, his mind racing to solve the final puzzle as the machine hummed and whirred beneath him. The resistance released, and he stumbled backward, gasping for air. His body was exhausted, but there was something new in his chest, a fire. He had broken through. Again. Jonah watched him carefully from the sidelines, his expression inscrutable. "Well done, John. You've done what most can't. But remember, this is just the beginning. If you want to keep pushing forward, you'll need to learn to embrace the pressure. Your limits are only what you believe them to be. John's heart pounded in his chest. As he looked around at the others, he realized that he wasn't the only one who had just crossed a line. But there was no going back now. The Musk protocol had him, body, mind, and soul. John stood in front of the massive glass windows that overlooked the sprawling landscape beyond the neuromuscle facility. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the green fields and distant hills. It felt like a world away from everything he knew, a world where time moved at its own pace, where nothing was pressing, and there was no pressure to become something more than human. But that was no longer his reality. As he stared at the horizon, his mind raced, replaying the events of the day, the neural resistance trainer, the mental puzzles, the pressure that seemed to come from all sides. His muscles were sore, his mind tired, but he felt alive in a way that was almost frightening. It was as though he had touched something vast and powerful, something beyond his understanding. The same fire that had surged within him earlier was now burning inside his chest, fueling a relentless drive to keep going. To push further. To transform. It wasn't just physical strength anymore. The real change was happening inside his mind. Frankie walked up beside him, her eyes wary but filled with curiosity. She had been quiet ever since the grueling workout session. The strain on her face was visible, but there was something else in her eyes, something deeper. "Do you feel it too?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. John glanced at her, reading the concern in her expression. She wasn't just asking about his muscles, she was asking about the transformation, the mental shift that had taken place in all of them. "I do," he admitted. "It's like the whole world's become sharper. My body feels stronger than ever, but my mind, it's like a steel trap. Focused. Unyielding." Frankie nodded slowly. "I've been trying to process everything, but it's hard to keep up. Sometimes it feels like I'm losing control, like it's all just too much." John could hear the edge of panic in her voice, a tremor that she was trying to hide. He knew exactly what she meant. The pressure wasn't just physical, it was mental. And the longer they stayed in the Musk protocol, the harder it would be to distinguish where their thoughts ended and the program's influence began. But there was no turning back now. No matter how overwhelming it felt, they had all crossed a line, and there was no going back. They were already too deep. "I get it," John said, his voice steady. "But think about what we're becoming. We're not just getting stronger. We're unlocking parts of ourselves we didn't even know existed." Frankie gave him a look of disbelief. "Is that what you really believe? Or is that what they want us to believe?" It wasn't the first time he'd questioned his motives. The Musk protocol had become more than just a physical regimen. It was a psychological and emotional journey, too. And with each new challenge, John found himself grappling with the realization that he wasn't sure how much of this transformation was his own choice, and how much was being engineered by the people who were orchestrating it all. But even as doubt gnawed at him, another part of him, a larger part, was consumed with the need to keep going. The results were undeniable. His body was stronger, his mind clearer. And the sense of purpose that had once been buried under years of grief and pain was now coming to the surface, clearer and sharper than ever before. The next morning, John found himself in the gym once again, but this time, there was no one else around. The facility was eerily silent, save for the hum of machines in the background. It felt like he was the only one left in the world, facing whatever challenge lay ahead. A single message appeared on his wristband: "Today, we test your willpower." Jonah walked into the room just as John was preparing for whatever lay ahead. His expression was unreadable, as always. "We've seen your progress, John. You're physically stronger than most people your age, but this is where things get real," Jonah said, his voice cold and clinical. John raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean by that?" Jonah gestured to the far side of the gym, where a large, metallic structure stood. It looked like an obstacle course, but more elaborate than anything John had ever seen. There were ropes, ladders, and various contraptions that seemed designed to test every possible skill. "This is the willpower gauntlet," Jonah said, a slight edge in his voice. "It's a series of challenges that combine both physical and mental tests. You'll be required to complete each obstacle while solving real-time cognitive puzzles. The obstacles will get harder as you go, and the puzzles will grow more complex. You will not stop until you finish." John felt a spike of adrenaline in his veins. This was it, the ultimate test. His muscles were still sore from yesterday's exercises, but he was ready. Whatever Jonah had in store, he would face it head-on. "What's the catch?" John asked, his voice low. Jonah's lips curled into a thin smile. "The catch is that if you fail, the protocol will intensify. The pressure will increase, and the stakes will get higher. You won't be able to stop until you finish or collapse." The first obstacle was simple enough, a series of ropes that John had to climb over a narrow chasm. His body ached as he grabbed onto the ropes and pulled himself across, his fingers raw from the tension. But that was nothing compared to the mental puzzle that popped up on the screen in front of him, demanding that he solve a sequence of numbers in less than a minute. His heart was racing. He could feel the pressure mounting, both physically and mentally. But there was no time to waste. He focused on the numbers, blocking out the pain in his arms, and solved the puzzle just in time. The rope beneath his hands shifted, and he moved on to the next challenge. The obstacles became harder, both physically and mentally. He had to jump across platforms while balancing on a thin beam, solve increasingly difficult puzzles, and withstand the pressure of a machine that constantly increased resistance as he progressed. By the time he reached the final obstacle, a maze of moving walls and shifting platforms, his body was screaming in protest. His mind was on the edge of breaking. But he refused to stop. With each step, each puzzle solved, the steel in his mind grew stronger. He could feel the weight of his past, the grief, the loss, slipping away, replaced by a new kind of resolve. He wasn't just fighting for strength. He was fighting for control. The last wall loomed ahead, and he knew that if he could get through this, he would have unlocked something more than just physical transformation. With one final surge of energy, John made his way through the maze, solving the final puzzle with seconds to spare. He stumbled out of the gauntlet, drenched in sweat, but victorious. Jonah watched from the sidelines, his eyes narrowed. "You've made it through. But remember, John, this is only the beginning. The real test is what you do with the power you've unlocked." John stood there, breathing heavily, a sense of clarity washing over him. He had passed the test. But now, he had a choice to make. A choice that would determine the course of his life. And his transformation. John sat on the edge of the recovery pod, staring at his hands. They were shaking, but it wasn't from exhaustion. No, there was something deeper. Something inside him that was awakening. He had just completed the willpower gauntlet, a feat that seemed almost impossible, and now, he felt as though he had crossed a threshold. But crossing that line came with consequences. Jonah had told him that the real test was what he would do with the power he had unlocked, but John wasn't sure what that meant. He had achieved more in a few days than he had in the last decade of his life. His body felt stronger than it ever had, his mind sharper than it had been in years. But was it worth it? What was he becoming? Frankie appeared in the doorway, her face pale and drawn, her posture stiff as if she, too, was battling something that couldn't be easily articulated. "John," she said, her voice low, "are you okay?" John looked up at her, taking a deep breath. "I don't know anymore," he admitted. "It's like everything's changing so fast, and I can't keep up. My body feels invincible, but, my mind, it's like I'm losing myself." Frankie stepped closer, her eyes full of concern. "I feel it too. Every time I think I'm in control, it's like the program takes over. The pressure, the constant drive to push farther, it's consuming me." John's heart sank. He wasn't the only one feeling this way. The intensity of the Musk protocol wasn't just physical, it was a mental onslaught. Every test, every workout, every puzzle felt like a battle to retain control over his own identity. And the longer they stayed in this system, the more he wondered if they would ever be able to walk away from it. "We have to talk to Jonah," Frankie continued, her voice tight with frustration. "This is too much. We didn't sign up for this. We wanted to get stronger, to feel better, but it's becoming something else." John nodded slowly, his thoughts swirling. "You're right. We need answers. This can't just be about becoming some kind of experiment." The two of them made their way to Jonah's office, the high-tech corridor seeming colder and more sterile than ever before. It felt like they were walking into the belly of the beast, a place where decisions were made for them, and where freedom had no place. Jonah was at his desk, typing away on his holographic screen. He looked up as they entered, his expression unchanged. "You've both done well," he said, almost as if he were congratulating them for surviving the gauntlet. "But I can see the doubt in your eyes. The pressure is taking its toll, isn't it?" John clenched his fists, a flicker of anger rising in his chest. "You knew this would happen. You knew we'd break." Jonah stood and walked around the desk, his face cool and detached. "The pressure is what drives transformation, John. Without it, you remain stagnant. Mediocre. The human race has been stagnant for far too long. What I'm offering is the chance to evolve. To push past the limits of aging, of physical decline, of weakness." Frankie shook her head. "But this isn't evolution, Jonah. This is manipulation. You're not giving us a choice. You're controlling us, pushing us into something we didn't ask for." Jonah's eyes softened, almost imperceptibly. "I understand your concerns. But you're not seeing the bigger picture. This isn't just about you anymore. The Musk protocol isn't about creating the perfect individual, it's about creating the perfect society. Imagine a world where age is no longer a barrier. Where strength, focus, and health are within everyone's reach. The world you knew is gone. What I'm offering is the future." John felt the weight of Jonah's words pressing down on him. The future. He had heard these promises before, promises of a world without limitations. Of a world where pain, aging, and death were no longer inevitable. But there was a price to pay. And with each passing day, John was starting to wonder if that price was too high. Jonah stepped closer to John, his voice softer now, almost coaxing. "You felt it, haven't you? The power. The clarity. You're stronger than you've ever been. And it's only going to get better. You can feel that, can't you?" John hesitated. He had felt the changes, felt his muscles grow stronger, his mind clearer, his body capable of things he never thought possible. But at what cost? His heart was racing, his thoughts becoming tangled in a storm of conflicting emotions. "What's the alternative?" Jonah continued, his eyes narrowing. "You leave. Go back to your old life. To mediocrity. To aging, weakness, and limitations. The world outside is no longer designed for people like you. It's a world where people like you will fade away." Frankie stepped forward, her voice sharp. "What you're doing, Jonah, is wrong. This isn't about the future. It's about control. You're taking away our ability to choose. You're turning us into machines, and I won't let that happen." John's gaze flickered between Frankie and Jonah, his mind torn. On one hand, Jonah was offering something unprecedented, a chance to break free from the chains of aging, from the weaknesses of the human body. On the other hand, he was forcing them into it, without any regard for their choice. "I didn't sign up for this," John said quietly, his voice steady. "I came here to get stronger. To feel better. But I'm not willing to sacrifice who I am in the process. I want to be in control of my own life." Jonah's expression hardened, his face revealing a flicker of something like disdain. You think you can walk away from this, John? Once you've tasted what's possible, once you've felt the power, you'll never want to go back. John stood tall, his body still aching but his resolve stronger than ever. I don't need this, Jonah. I need myself back. He turned to Frankie, a silent understanding passing between them. Together, they had made it this far, and now, they would walk away, on their own terms. Jonah watched them leave, his eyes darkening with frustration, but John knew it was the right decision. They had to make a choice, and they had chosen freedom. As they stepped out into the sunlight, John could feel the weight of the world lifting from his shoulders. But there was no time to relax. The road ahead was uncertain, and the path to reclaiming their lives wouldn't be easy. But they were free, and that was worth everything. The air was crisp outside the neuromuscle facility, the kind of clean, refreshing breeze that only came after a storm had passed. John and Frankie stood in front of the imposing, glass-fronted building, the cool wind tangling their hair and making their skin prickle with new awareness. The weight of the decision they had just made settled into the space between them like an unspoken understanding. For the first time in days, John felt a sense of clarity. His muscles still burned from the grueling tests, his mind was racing with everything they had experienced, but there was something else, freedom. It was intoxicating. I can't believe we're really leaving, Frankie said, breaking the silence. Her voice was soft, a mix of relief and lingering doubt. She looked up at the facility, her eyes tracing the sleek lines of the building, the shiny metallic surfaces that once seemed like a promise of transformation. Now, it looked more like a cage. We made the right choice, John replied, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside. This, all of it, it was too much. We didn't sign up to be part of a program. We signed up to get stronger, to feel better. But we lost ourselves in the process. And that's not something I'm willing to sacrifice. Frankie nodded slowly, but there was a question in her eyes. Do you think we're making a mistake? Walking away from everything we've gained? John considered her question, the weight of it settling in his chest. What if they were walking away from the future? From the opportunity to be something greater, something stronger than they had ever imagined? Wasn't that what they wanted when they first signed up? To transcend the limitations of aging, to become the best versions of themselves. But now, it felt like they were leaving behind more than just a physical transformation. They were leaving behind control, their control. The Musk protocol, for all its promises, had made them feel like puppets on strings, reacting to every pull, every nudge from the system. And while their bodies had become stronger, more resilient, their minds had become entangled in a web of pressure and manipulation. No, John said finally, the decision solidifying in his mind. I don't think we're making a mistake. We can find our own way. A way that doesn't involve being part of someone else's experiment. The world outside felt different now, unfamiliar. There were no more walls, no more tests, no more schedules dictating their every move. It was just the two of them, walking into an unknown future. I'm scared, John, Frankie admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. What now? We've given so much to this, and now, we don't have a plan. We don't have a backup. We're just, walking away. John reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder. We might not have a plan right now, but we have each other. And that's more than enough to start. As they made their way toward the nearest bus stop, John's mind raced. He felt lighter, but also uncertain. Could they really rebuild their lives without the crutch of the Musk protocol? They had been given everything, strength, mental clarity, the promise of a better life. Walking away meant letting go of all of it, even the sense of purpose that came with it. But was that purpose theirs, or was it simply a product of the system they had been caught in? Back at his apartment, John tried to relax, but his body felt restless. There were still traces of the intensity they had lived under at Neuromuscle, the rigorous workouts, the mental puzzles, the endless pressure to achieve. He couldn't shake the feeling that it had left an imprint on him, a need to do something, to be something. He wasn't sure he knew how to live without that constant push. "You good?" Frankie asked, sitting down beside him on the couch, her voice full of empathy. John let out a deep breath. "I think I will be. It's just hard to let go of what we thought we were becoming. I keep thinking about all the things we could have accomplished, all the ways we could have been better. But now we're back to square one." Frankie smiled faintly. "Better? You mean, perfect?" she teased, though her tone was filled with tenderness. "We don't need perfection. We need balance." For the first time in a long while, John allowed himself to smile. "You're right. I've been chasing something that doesn't even exist. All we need is to feel good in our own skin, to be stronger in a way that feels right, not just because someone else tells us we need to be." Frankie leaned back, letting out a contented sigh. "I guess we'll figure it out together. But first, I think we deserve a real meal. And I'm not talking about synthetic protein bars." John laughed, the sound feeling like a balm for his soul. "Sounds like a plan. I could go for something that actually tastes like food." The next few days were filled with small but significant moments. They went for long walks, rediscovering what it felt like to have no schedule, no tests looming over them. They cooked meals together, savoring the simple pleasure of fresh ingredients and unhurried conversation. The world had slowed down, and for the first time in months, they felt at peace. But as the days passed, John couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was still something they had to confront. They had walked away from the Musk protocol, but it hadn't just disappeared from their lives. It had left its mark on them, and there were still questions that needed to be answered. Frankie seemed to sense it too. One evening, after a quiet dinner, she turned to him, her expression serious. "So, what's next?" she asked. "We've reclaimed our freedom. But what now? Are we going to go back to our old lives, or do we take what we've learned and figure out a way to keep moving forward?" John took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision ahead. He didn't have all the answers. But he knew one thing for sure: this moment, this freedom, this chance to rebuild, was their opportunity to create something new. Not just for themselves, but for others who might be facing the same choices. "We don't have to have everything figured out right now," John said, his voice filled with resolve. "But we can make something better. We can take everything we've learned and find our own way to transform, without anyone pulling the strings." John and Frankie didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long while, they were ready to face it. They were free to chart their own course, no longer bound by a protocol that sought to control them, but instead empowered by the strength they had discovered within themselves. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would be their own. And that, John realized, was the true transformation. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The days following their departure from the neuromuscle facility were filled with new challenges and uncertainties. John and Frankie were free, but what did freedom truly mean after they had spent so much time under the weight of the Musk protocol? Could they simply go back to the way things were? Or had their experiences irreparably changed them, pushing them towards something greater? It was a question that lingered in the air between them, an unspoken tension that hung over their daily routines. One morning, John woke up early, the faint light of dawn creeping through the blinds. His muscles, still sore from the intensity of the training at Neuromuscle, felt both heavier and lighter than they ever had before. It was an odd sensation. His body had been transformed, but it wasn't just his body that was different. His mind, too, seemed sharper, more focused. But there was still a sense of disconnect. The overwhelming pressure of the program had left its mark on him, a nagging feeling that he was always striving for something that couldn't be fully attained. John walked into the kitchen, where Frankie was already up, sipping coffee and staring out the window. She looked peaceful, but there was a subtle tension in the way she held herself. She wasn't the type to just settle into relaxation, not after everything they had been through. "Morning," John said, pouring himself a cup of coffee. "Morning," Frankie replied, her gaze lingering on him for a moment before she turned back to the window. "How are you feeling?" John hesitated before answering. "Better. But I don't know. It's like I'm still waiting for the next test, the next challenge. After everything we went through at Neuromuscle, it feels strange to just have time to breathe." Frankie smiled faintly. "I know what you mean. It's hard to let go of that constant push. But maybe that's the point. We're so used to pushing ourselves to the limit that we forgot what it's like to simply be. To take it slow and find balance." John nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. "Balance. That's what we've been missing. All those years of pushing harder, faster, stronger, without ever considering what it might cost us in the long run." The next few days were an experiment in slowing down. They went for walks through the city, deliberately taking their time. They ate meals without rushing, savoring the flavors and textures of real, whole foods. They didn't focus on anything except the present moment, enjoying the simple pleasure of being together and not being under constant pressure. But it wasn't long before the restlessness set in. One evening, as they were finishing dinner, Frankie turned to John, her brow furrowed. "You know, we can't just live like this forever. We can't avoid the real world. At some point, we have to do something with what we've learned. We can't just walk away from all the potential we unlocked." John paused, considering her words. "What do you mean? You're saying we should go back to the Musk protocol?" "No, not the protocol," she said quickly, shaking her head. "But maybe we take what we learned, the strength, the mental clarity, and apply it in a way that works for us. We can help people, teach them how to get stronger without the crazy pressures of the system. We don't need to be part of a big corporation to make a difference." John's mind raced as he absorbed her words. Frankie was right. They had been given something remarkable: strength, focus, the ability to transform their bodies and minds, but they didn't need to rely on anyone else to unlock their potential. They could take the principles of the Musk protocol, remove the coercion and the manipulation, and share it with others in a way that was empowering, not controlling. The next morning, John and Frankie sat down to brainstorm. They didn't have a clear plan yet, but they knew one thing for sure: they couldn't just fade into the background. They had something to offer, something that could change the lives of others who had been left behind by the fast-paced world that valued only youth and perfection. "What if we started a program?" John suggested, his voice steady but filled with excitement. "We could teach people how to get stronger, how to be more focused, how to feel better about themselves, without all the pressure. A program that's built on balance, on learning to listen to your body, instead of just pushing it to the limit." Frankie's eyes lit up. "I love that idea. And we could focus on older adults, people like us who are looking for a way to reclaim their strength, their vitality. The system doesn't cater to people our age, but we could. We could make it accessible, empowering, and sustainable." They spent the next few weeks developing their plan, drawing on everything they had learned at Neuromuscle and crafting a program that focused on holistic well-being. They incorporated nutrition, exercise, mental clarity, and mindfulness, all with the goal of helping others regain their strength and confidence without the extreme measures that had defined their own journey. It wasn't about perfection. It was about progress. But as they worked, they encountered challenges. They didn't have the same resources that Neuromuscle had: no cutting-edge technology, no large-scale infrastructure. Their program would be grassroots, built on their own experiences and knowledge. But that, John realized, was exactly what made it authentic. They weren't selling some perfect vision of what people could be, they were sharing real stories, real struggles, and real transformations. People didn't need another perfect system. They needed a community. They needed to feel empowered, not judged. John spent hours researching and developing meal plans, exercises, and mental exercises that were accessible and effective for people of all ages. Frankie reached out to her network, talking to local gyms, fitness instructors, and community leaders who shared their vision. Slowly, but surely, the foundation of their new program began to take shape. They named it Strength of Will, a program designed to help people regain their vitality, unlock their inner strength, and live healthier, more balanced lives. It was a tribute to the journey they had taken together, a reminder that true strength came from within. As they launched their program, John felt a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that this was the true test, not the challenges of the Musk protocol, but the challenge of creating something meaningful and lasting from the lessons they had learned. And with Frankie by his side, he knew they could make it work. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. But for the first time in a long while, John felt ready to face whatever came next. The launch of Strength of Will was nothing short of exhilarating. John and Frankie had poured their hearts into the program, drawing from their experiences at Neuromuscle and their newfound commitment to creating something real, something sustainable. The first few days were a blur of emails, phone calls, and meetings with potential collaborators. But as the program began to take shape, they realized that the real work had only just begun. They had started small, a few local gyms, some community centers, and a handful of personal clients who were curious enough to give it a shot. But the response was overwhelming. The message of balance, empowerment, and sustainable strength resonated with people in ways they hadn't anticipated. Soon, they were booking more sessions than they could handle, and the excitement of helping others transformed their own journey in ways they never expected. Frankie sat in their small office one afternoon, going through a stack of emails. Her eyes sparkled as she looked up from her screen. "John, we're on to something big. I've just received messages from people as far away as California and Florida. They want to know how they can join Strength of Will." John leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. It was a good kind of exhaustion, but exhaustion nonetheless. He had never anticipated how much work would go into building a program like this. But the excitement in Frankie's voice was enough to push through the fatigue. "That's amazing, Frankie. We've only just begun." They were still ironing out the details of how to scale their program, balancing their time between one-on-one coaching and group sessions. But as the demand grew, it was clear they would need to hire additional trainers, create online content, and expand their outreach. It wasn't just about offering a program anymore, it was about creating a movement. That night, as they sat down to dinner together, Frankie brought up a question that had been nagging at her for days. "John, we need to talk about the future. We can't just keep running on this momentum forever. How are we going to handle everything when it gets even bigger?" John looked at her, his brow furrowed. She was right. The momentum was exhilarating, but it also had the potential to overwhelm them. They had started small, but now it seemed like there was no limit to what Strength of Will could become. "I don't know," he admitted. "I hadn't really thought that far ahead. I just wanted to help people, you know." Frankie smiled softly, her eyes full of understanding. "I get it. But we need to have a plan, or we're going to lose control. We can't keep doing everything ourselves. We need a team, we need a strategy to expand without losing the essence of what we're doing." John took a deep breath. She was right again. They couldn't afford to lose sight of what had made Strength of Will successful in the first place, their commitment to real, sustainable change. They needed to make sure that as they scaled, they didn't dilute the authenticity of their message. "Okay, so we need to think about hiring some key people. Trainers, yes. But also people who can help with logistics, marketing, and content creation. And we need to set up some structure for the program so that it's easy for everyone to follow, but still customizable based on individual needs." Frankie nodded, already pulling out her phone to make notes. "We also need to make sure we stay connected with our community. We can't just push out a program and hope it works. We need feedback, we need interaction. That's what's kept people engaged so far." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of planning, meetings, and refining. They hired 2 additional trainers who shared their vision and passion for holistic strength. They partnered with a local marketing firm to help spread the word about strength of will. And they began creating online resources, video tutorials, meal plans, and workout routines, that could be accessed by anyone, anywhere. But just as they were starting to find their rhythm, the challenges of scaling a program began to hit harder. Not everyone who signed up was ready for the kind of commitment strength of will required. Some were looking for quick fixes, the kind of instant gratification that had been promised to them at Neuromuscle. They were used to the idea of drastic, rapid transformation, the kind of results that came from pushing the body to extremes. And when they didn't see those kinds of results right away, they started to drop off. John sat in the office late one night, reviewing the program's first-month statistics. The numbers weren't bad, but they weren't as high as he'd hoped. His eyes narrowed as he scanned through the feedback. "Frankie, look at this," he said, showing her his screen. "We've had a 30% drop-off rate after the first 2 weeks. People aren't sticking with the program." Frankie looked over his shoulder, her face thoughtful. "I knew this would happen. People want instant results. They're used to the quick fix mentality. And we're offering something different, something that takes time, dedication, and patience. But that's hard for some people to grasp." The truth hit John harder than he expected. They weren't offering a quick fix. They weren't promising rapid, superficial results. They were offering something deeper. Something more meaningful. But the question remained, how could they make people understand that? After a long discussion, they decided to make some changes. They began to focus even more on education. Helping people understand the process, explaining why slow, sustainable progress was better than short-term bursts of extreme intensity. They worked to reinforce the idea that transformation was a journey, not a destination. They also increased their engagement with their community. They started hosting weekly check-ins, offering more one-on-one support, and opening up about their own struggles. They shared stories of their journey, how they had walked away from the Musk protocol in search of something more authentic, something that worked for them. They made it clear that strength of will wasn't about achieving perfection. It was about learning to live better, day by day. As the months passed, the program began to find its rhythm. The drop-off rates decreased, and more people began to see the benefits of the approach. Their clients were building strength, not just in their bodies, but in their minds. They were embracing balance over extremes. They were rediscovering what it meant to be truly healthy. One evening, as John and Frankie sat on the porch after a long day, watching the sun set behind the mountains, John turned to her with a satisfied smile. "You were right," he said. "We've built something real. Something that's making a difference." Frankie smiled back, her eyes reflecting the warmth of the setting sun. "We didn't just build a program, John. We built a movement." It wasn't long before Strength of Will became a movement. What had started as a small program offering real, sustainable strength for seniors began to ripple outward, reaching people of all ages, backgrounds, and walks of life. John and Frankie had done it, they had created something that truly resonated with people. Their inboxes were flooded with messages every day. Testimonials, success stories, questions about the program, requests for partnerships, and even media inquiries. They had caught the attention of fitness influencers, health bloggers, and people in the wellness community. John and Frankie were no longer just a couple of trainers, they were the faces of a revolution in how people approached fitness. One morning, as they sat down to review their expanding network, Frankie noticed something peculiar. A reporter from a popular fitness magazine had requested an interview. At first, she was excited. The exposure could be huge for the program. But then she noticed the tone of the email, a hint of skepticism woven into the words. "John, look at this," Frankie said, passing her phone over to him. "They want to talk, but they're asking some pretty pointed questions about our approach. They want to know if we really believe in sustainable strength or if this is just another trendy fitness fad." John frowned as he read the message. It wasn't the first time they'd encountered this kind of questioning. Skepticism had always followed them, especially because their approach wasn't about quick fixes or extreme measures. It wasn't flashy or full of promises of overnight transformations. But that, in its own way, was the point. "Let's do it," John said after a moment, determination settling in his voice. "We have nothing to hide. This is what we believe in. It's working, and we're not backing down." The interview was scheduled for the following week. But even as they prepared for it, John and Frankie knew this wasn't going to be easy. They weren't just defending their program. They were defending a philosophy, a way of life that rejected the extremes of mainstream fitness culture. They spent the days leading up to the interview preparing their talking points. They reviewed their clients' success stories, the research that backed their holistic approach, and the principles behind strength of will. The day of the interview, a reporter named Lisa showed up at their office. She was professional but had an air of skepticism about her. Her questions were sharp and direct, probing into their motivations and the long-term sustainability of their program. It felt like an interrogation at times, but John and Frankie held their ground. "So, you're telling me," Lisa pressed, "that the key to strength in older adults is simply eating better, exercising consistently, and focusing on mental well-being? No magic pills, no extreme regimens?" John leaned forward, his tone steady. "That's exactly it. Strength isn't just about muscle mass or how fast you can lift a weight. It's about resilience. It's about having the energy and mental clarity to live your life to the fullest, regardless of age. What we're offering is not about extreme transformations. It's about creating a lifestyle that fosters lasting strength and balance." Lisa raised an eyebrow, clearly not convinced. "But don't you think people want faster results? Don't you think there's a place for the intense, muscle-building programs that promise fast changes?" Frankie jumped in, her voice firm. "There's always a place for that, if that's what someone's looking for. But not everyone wants to push their body to the brink. We're offering an alternative. A sustainable alternative. One that focuses on progress, not perfection." Lisa paused, as if considering their words. After a long silence, she nodded slowly. "I see. So, you're not in competition with other fitness programs. You're just offering something different." "Exactly," John said. "We're offering people a chance to take control of their own health. And to feel empowered, not pressured." The interview ended on a much more positive note than either of them had expected. Lisa seemed to appreciate their perspective, even if she wasn't entirely sold on it. By the time she left, both John and Frankie felt a sense of relief. They hadn't backed down from their message, and they had given an honest, transparent account of what strength of will was all about. The article came out a week later. It was a balanced piece, acknowledging their program's success but questioning its ability to sustain long-term growth in a culture that demanded more instant results. But John and Frankie were okay with that. They knew that their approach wasn't for everyone, and they were fine with taking their time to build something that could last. While the article didn't lead to an immediate surge of new clients, it did spark important conversations. People began to ask more questions about what strength of will really stood for, and John and Frankie were happy to answer. It wasn't about chasing fame or recognition. It was about changing the way people thought about fitness and health. It was about redefining what strength really meant. As their program continued to grow, they started receiving requests from different communities, senior centers, rehabilitation centers, and even corporations looking to offer wellness programs for their employees. The demand for what they were offering was increasing, and with it came new challenges. It was clear that they were now at a crossroads. Could they expand strength of will without compromising the values they had worked so hard to build? Could they reach more people without losing the personal touch that had made their program so successful in the first place? John and Frankie knew that these questions weren't easy to answer. But as they sat together that evening, reflecting on how far they had come, they felt more confident than ever that they could find a way. "We're doing something good, Frankie," John said, looking out at the setting sun. "We may not have all the answers, but we're on the right path." Frankie smiled. "The road ahead won't be easy, but we've come this far. And we'll keep going." It was early morning when John and Frankie met at their usual coffee spot, a small cafe tucked away from the hustle and bustle of the city. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft, golden glow through the windows. They had a lot to discuss, and neither of them was sure where to begin. The success of Strength of Will had exceeded their expectations, but with success came difficult decisions. They were at a crossroads: should they continue growing at the pace they had been, or slow things down to maintain the personal, hands-on approach that had made their program so unique? "I've been thinking a lot about this lately," Frankie said, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. "We're getting a ton of requests. I've had emails from wellness organizations, even a couple of big-name gyms wanting to partner with us. We could expand in a way we never imagined." John looked at her, his face lined with concern. "But at what cost? If we start partnering with big gyms, we risk losing the personal connection we've built with our clients. They come to us because we're not a cookie-cutter program. We're not offering them a one-size-fits-all solution." Frankie nodded, the weight of the decision settling on her shoulders. "I get it. But we can't ignore the demand. If we don't scale, someone else will fill the gap. And honestly, we've created something that could help so many people. Maybe it's time we thought bigger." John leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath. He knew Frankie was right. But the idea of compromising the program's integrity didn't sit well with him. They had created something different, something that wasn't about rushing results or following trends. They had built Strength of Will on the belief that slow, steady progress was the key to real strength, both physically and mentally. "We can't just go for growth for the sake of growth," John said, his voice firm. "What makes us special is that we're hands-on. We connect with people. We guide them through their journey. If we lose that, what's the point?" Frankie looked at him, her expression softening. "I'm not saying we abandon everything we've worked for. But we need a plan that allows us to scale without losing what makes us us. We can still keep the personal touch. It's just going to take more work, more structure." The conversation continued as they brainstormed solutions, a balance between expansion and personal connection. They knew they couldn't take on all the requests coming their way, but they also didn't want to close the door on opportunities that could take their program to new heights. "We could develop an online platform," John suggested after a while. "Something that allows us to provide virtual training, but still with that personal touch. Maybe even group coaching sessions. It wouldn't be the same as one-on-one, but we could still create a sense of community." Frankie's eyes lit up at the idea. "That's actually brilliant. We could offer specialized courses for people in different regions, and maybe even have local coaches who are trained in our methods. That way, we're scaling, but we're still keeping it close-knit. We could even do live virtual check-ins, so it's more interactive." They spent the next few hours mapping out the details: an online platform where people could access personalized workout plans, meal guidance, and mental wellness strategies. They would still prioritize the holistic approach, but they would make it accessible to a larger audience. And by partnering with trainers they trusted, they could maintain the personal touch. As they finalized the idea, John couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something more was at play here. Scaling the program was important, yes, but what did it really mean to stay true to their mission? They had built Strength of Will with the belief that everyone, no matter their age, deserved access to sustainable fitness. But the industry as a whole was so focused on speed and performance, how could they ensure that their message didn't get lost in the noise? The answer came in a flash. "Frankie," John said suddenly, his voice full of conviction, "we need to make our message louder. People need to understand that we're not just another fitness trend. We're offering something that's changing the game." In the weeks that followed, they began to focus more on spreading their message. They reached out to influencers who aligned with their values, working together to create content that emphasized the long-term benefits of sustainable fitness. They hosted webinars, wrote articles, and shared personal stories of their clients, illustrating how the Strength of Will approach wasn't about chasing after the latest fad, but about redefining what it meant to be strong at any age. It wasn't long before Strength of Will had caught the attention of mainstream media once again. This time, though, it wasn't a skeptical interview that they were facing, it was an opportunity to showcase their program to an even wider audience. A major national television network had reached out, offering them a segment on one of their health-focused shows. The exposure could be huge. But the decision wasn't as easy as it seemed. Was this the right time to go public with their message? Would they be able to control the narrative, or would they be forced into a box that didn't reflect what they stood for? John and Frankie sat down together to discuss it. "This is our chance to really make an impact," Frankie said, her excitement palpable. "We could reach millions of people with this segment." John rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "I know. But what happens if we get put into a category we don't belong in? What if they make it seem like we're just another quick-fix program?" Frankie smiled, the same calm confidence that had guided them through so many challenges returning. "We won't let them. We'll stay true to who we are. We'll tell our story, explain why we believe in sustainable strength, and share the results that speak for themselves. If they try to box us in, we'll just break out." The decision was made. They would go on the show, but they would do it their way. They would share their journey honestly and authentically, and they would make it clear that Strength of Will was a movement, not a trend. As they prepared for the television segment, John felt a new sense of clarity. They weren't just at a crossroads anymore. They were at the beginning of something bigger than they had ever imagined. The world was finally ready for a new kind of strength, a strength that didn't come from extremes, but from balance. And Strength of Will was going to be the one to show them how to get there. The day of the television segment arrived faster than either John or Frankie had anticipated. It felt like everything they had worked for, all the planning, the sleepless nights, the endless discussions about how to scale Strength of Will without losing its essence, had led up to this one moment. They were going to be on national television, talking to millions of people about the transformative power of sustainable strength for seniors. But with the excitement came an undercurrent of anxiety. What if they weren't ready? What if they fumbled their words, or worse, got misunderstood? The fitness industry was cutthroat, and while they had stayed true to their mission, the pressure of the spotlight could easily turn things in a direction they weren't prepared for. As they made their way to the studio that morning, John kept his eyes focused on the road. The city passed by in a blur, but his mind was racing. He had rehearsed his lines over and over in his head, but nothing could prepare him for the reality of being in front of a live audience. Frankie, ever the optimist, tried to reassure him. "Hey, remember what we're here for. This isn't about impressing them. This is about sharing something real. We've been doing this for months now. We know this program inside and out." John nodded, though his nerves were still getting the better of him. "I know. But when you're talking to millions of people, it's hard not to feel the weight of it." They arrived at the studio, and the nerves were impossible to ignore now. There was an energy in the air, the bustling crew members, the bright lights, the faint hum of cameras setting up. Everything felt surreal. This wasn't just another day in the office, this was the moment they had worked toward since they first launched Strength of Will. After checking in, they were ushered into a small dressing room. Frankie sat down in front of a mirror, starting to go over her notes again, but she could tell John was still in his head. "John," she said gently, "look at me." He turned to face her. "We've been through a lot. This is no different. We have a mission, and all we have to do is share that. We know why we're doing this, and that's all we need to focus on. You've got this." John smiled, taking a deep breath. "You're right. Let's do this." The moment they walked out onto the set, the nerves didn't completely fade, but they began to settle. The studio host, Emily, greeted them with warmth, her calm presence a welcome contrast to the buzzing energy in the air. She asked about their program, how it was created, and why they thought Strength of Will was resonating so deeply with older adults. Frankie spoke first, articulating their vision for the program with passion. When we first started, we wanted to create something that didn't just focus on getting in shape. We wanted to give people the tools to live stronger, healthier lives, no matter their age. And as we've seen, people are tired of the quick-fix mentality. They want something that lasts. John chimed in, his voice steady now. It's about more than just lifting weights. It's about building resilience, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. Our program is designed to help seniors regain their strength and confidence in a way that feels sustainable. The host nodded thoughtfully, clearly engaged. I love that message. It's definitely refreshing in an industry that's so focused on extreme workouts and rapid results. But you're offering a different kind of challenge, one that's focused on longevity. But I have to ask, how do you deal with the skepticism that comes with it? People want results. They want to see quick changes. Frankie smiled. We get that a lot, and we totally understand. But what we've seen is that lasting change isn't about quick results. It's about building a foundation. Our program is about taking small, manageable steps that add up over time. And when we see our clients make those small, but significant improvements, like being able to walk further or lift a bag of groceries without pain, that's where the real transformation happens. John added, it's not about how fast can you get to the finish line. It's about how strong you become along the way. And the beauty of that is that the strength you build lasts. It's not fleeting. The interview continued, and as it went on, both John and Frankie found themselves more at ease. They were speaking from the heart, and it was clear that their message was resonating with Emily. The conversation flowed naturally, and the host asked insightful questions that allowed them to share not just the facts of their program but the emotional drive behind it. After the interview wrapped up, Emily thanked them for coming on the show and wished them continued success. You're doing something really special, she said as they prepared to leave. You're challenging the way we think about aging and fitness. I have no doubt that your program is going to change a lot of lives. As John and Frankie stepped off the stage, they both let out a collective sigh of relief. The tension from earlier had dissolved. They had done it. They had shared their mission with the world, and they had stayed true to who they were. Back in the dressing room, Frankie grinned at John. See? We nailed it. I told you we were ready. John laughed, a weight lifting off his shoulders. You were right. That actually felt pretty good. The segment aired a few days later, and the response was overwhelmingly positive. Messages poured in from viewers who had watched the interview, many of them expressing their admiration for the program and the philosophy behind it. Some even signed up for Strength of Will immediately. But as the response flooded in, so did the reality of the situation. Their inboxes were filled with inquiries, from potential clients to partnership offers to media requests. It was clear now that Strength of Will was more than just a local program. It was on the verge of becoming something much bigger. John and Frankie sat down that evening, overwhelmed by the response. They had known there would be challenges ahead, but this was more than they had expected. This is it, John said quietly. We've taken the first big step. But now we have to figure out what comes next. Frankie nodded. We take it one step at a time. But we're ready. We've been ready. As they reflected on the journey so far, John and Frankie knew that the real work was only just beginning. The spotlight had come and gone, but the mission behind Strength of Will was just getting started. They were ready to meet whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that they had a message worth sharing. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Since their television appearance, the inbox had exploded. What had once been a small, local program was now garnering attention from people all over the country. Strength of Will was officially gaining momentum. John and Frankie were thrilled, but there was a nagging concern they couldn't shake. They had built this program from the ground up, ensuring that every participant felt seen, heard, and supported. But with this new level of interest came the risk of losing that personal touch, something they had worked so hard to cultivate. "I don't want to just become another fitness brand," John admitted one morning, as he scanned the list of new sign-ups for the week. "We've always been about real connection, the kind of connection that comes from working closely with people. How do we keep that, while also keeping up with the demand?" Frankie, always the optimist, tapped her pen against her notebook. "It's a challenge. But it's not impossible. What if we build a system that helps us stay involved in the process without doing everything ourselves? We can't do it all, but we can empower others to help carry our message forward." John raised an eyebrow. "You're talking about training coaches?" "Exactly. If we train a select group of coaches to follow the Strength of Will approach, they can offer that same personal touch to clients. We still have control over the program, but we're able to scale. We can even do a certification process to ensure the coaches embody our values," Frankie explained. John thought about it. It was a great idea, but it also meant more work. And the idea of training others to teach their methods felt like a huge responsibility. Could they trust others to stay true to their mission? Could they replicate the same level of care and dedication they had given each client? Frankie seemed to sense his hesitation. "I know it's a big step. But we can handpick the coaches. We can create a network of people who believe in what we're doing. It's about trust and quality. And if we give them the right tools, they'll be able to build strong, lasting relationships with their clients, just like we do." John nodded slowly, warming to the idea. "All right. But we have to ensure that the training isn't just about the physical program. It's got to be about the philosophy behind it, the long-term approach. We can't let the program become just another, hit it hard and fast, routine. That's not who we are." Frankie smiled. "Exactly. The real strength comes from consistency, patience, and connection. That's the message we need to get across." As they moved forward with this plan, John and Frankie found themselves facing new challenges, including developing a comprehensive certification program, designing training materials, and finding the right coaches to bring on board. But amidst the chaos, something unexpected happened. They began to see their own growth. They weren't just growing the program, they were growing as leaders. Learning to manage a larger organization, finding balance between their personal time and professional commitments, and refining their vision for the future was a steep learning curve. But with each new step, they felt more confident in their direction. The first batch of certified coaches was ready to roll out within a few months, and the response was overwhelming. Clients who had worked with Frankie and John personally were now able to experience the same level of care and support from other trainers who had been thoroughly trained in the Strength of Will methodology. One of their first success stories came from a woman named Susan, who had struggled with mobility issues for years. After working with one of the certified coaches, Susan saw significant improvements in her ability to walk longer distances and carry groceries without pain. She credited the program's focus on gradual, sustainable progress as the key to her success. "I can't believe the difference," Susan said in her testimonial. "I've been trying every workout routine out there, but none of them gave me what I needed." The approach at Strength of Will isn't about doing everything in a week or a month. It's about showing up, putting in the effort, and knowing that your body will grow stronger, slowly, but surely. For John and Frankie, it was a moment of validation. The work they had put into creating the program, the care, the thought, the slow, steady process, was paying off. It wasn't just about the numbers or the growth. It was about changing lives, one small step at a time. But even as they celebrated their successes, the challenges didn't stop. More media requests came in, partnerships were being discussed, and the pressure to maintain their growth became even more intense. It was a lot to handle, and sometimes it felt overwhelming. One evening, as they sat in the office late into the night, Frankie spoke up, breaking the silence. "John, I know we're both feeling the weight of everything right now. But I think we need to remember why we're doing this. It's not about how fast we grow, or how much recognition we get. It's about helping people find their strength. We've always said it's not about extremes. It's about sustainability. John nodded, exhausted but grateful for Frankie's clarity. You're right. We've got to take it one step at a time. If we stay true to the message, everything else will follow. In the months that followed, the momentum continued to build. Their vision of sustainable strength was taking hold, not just in their immediate community but across the country. The program was evolving, and so were they. John and Frankie knew that the road ahead would have its fair share of obstacles, but they were more confident than ever that they had the right foundation to overcome them. And no matter how big Strength of Will grew, they would never lose sight of what made it special, the commitment to helping people strengthen their bodies, minds, and spirits, one small step at a time. The ripple effect. It was a concept that John and Frankie had heard many times in their journey, but only now, as their program began to spread further across the country, were they beginning to truly understand its power. At first, it was just a few messages from people who had seen the Strength of Will program featured on a talk show or read about it in an article. They were thankful, inspired, and curious to learn more. But as the weeks passed, the messages grew more personal, deeper. Thank you for helping me regain my confidence. I never thought I'd be able to lift my grandkids again. Now, I can't wait to do it every weekend. I've struggled with feeling like my best years are behind me, but after following your program, I'm feeling stronger than ever. I thought I'd never be able to walk a mile again, but here I am. As these testimonials came in, John and Frankie felt a weight on their shoulders. This wasn't just a fitness program anymore. This was something that was changing people's lives on a deeply personal level. The ripple effect had started, and it was undeniable. One evening, as they reviewed the incoming feedback over dinner, John's mind raced. Frankie, we've made a real impact. People are not just getting stronger physically, they're reawakening. They're finding joy in movement again. But what's next? How do we keep this going? How do we keep it fresh? Frankie, as always, was the calm in the storm. It's all about community, John. Yes, we've had great success so far, but we've built something meaningful here. People are connecting with our message, and that's what makes the difference. Our focus now has to be on growing that sense of community. It's more than just a program. It's a movement. John took a deep breath, letting her words sink in. She was right. What they had created was bigger than they had ever imagined. They had gone from teaching a few local seniors to becoming a national movement, helping people reclaim their strength and health. But if they wanted to continue this momentum, they needed to focus on making that connection even stronger. As they brainstormed ideas to build their community, they decided to introduce virtual group workouts. These would be live, interactive sessions where participants from all over the country could join in, ask questions, and receive personalized feedback in real time. It was a way to bring the Strength of Will philosophy to the masses, ensuring that no one felt isolated in their journey. And then there was the idea of creating local Strength of Will meetups. These would be community-based groups where people could gather, share their stories, and support each other in person. The goal was to create a network of people who were committed to strengthening their bodies and minds together. The first virtual group workout took place just a few weeks later. John and Frankie were nervous. This was something entirely new, and they weren't sure how the participants would respond. But as they logged in and saw the familiar faces of their clients, now friends, filling the screen, their nerves began to fade. There was a sense of camaraderie in the virtual room, as people from different states and backgrounds worked out together, encouraged one another, and celebrated their small victories. John and Frankie took turns leading the session, offering tips, cheering on participants, and answering questions. After the session ended, the feedback was overwhelming. This was amazing. I've never felt so connected to a workout group before. I love the personal attention you give even in a group setting. It really feels like you're with us. I'm already looking forward to the next one. Thank you for making this feel like more than just a workout. The positive response from the virtual workout made it clear that this was the way forward. People wanted connection, and by offering real-time interaction, John and Frankie had created a sense of community that extended far beyond their local area. The ripple effect was spreading, and it was reaching people in ways they hadn't imagined. Then came the first local Strength of Will meetup in New York City. It was an intimate gathering at a community center, but the energy in the room was electric. There was something powerful about seeing everyone come together, sharing their struggles and victories. It was like a support group, but with the added element of movement, physical strength as a way to bolster emotional resilience. At the meetup, they heard stories from people whose lives had been transformed by the program. One woman, in her late 70s, spoke about how she had struggled with loneliness and depression after the loss of her husband. But with Strength of Will, she not only found her physical strength again, but she also formed new friendships, bringing new light into her life. I've met more wonderful people in the last 3 months than I have in the last 10 years, she said, her eyes welling up. And that's because of this program. It's about so much more than the weights and the exercises. It's about rediscovering joy in living. For John and Frankie, it was moments like these that reminded them why they had started this journey in the first place. It wasn't about fame or profit. It was about creating a community where people could come together, support one another, and grow stronger, both physically and emotionally. As they left the meetup that night, John turned to Frankie, his face reflecting a deep sense of fulfillment. This is it. This is what it's all about. The ripple effect we've created isn't just about getting people to lift weights. It's about helping them lift their spirits, lift their lives. Frankie smiled, her eyes reflecting the same sense of satisfaction. And we're just getting started. The ripple effect had begun, and its reach was far greater than they had ever anticipated. As the months passed, Strength of Will continued to grow, not just in numbers, but in the deep connections it fostered among its members. It was no longer just about fitness, it was about a movement, one that was changing the way people saw aging, strength, and community. As Strength of Will continued to expand, John and Frankie found themselves facing new challenges, some of which were more difficult than they could have anticipated. Despite the overwhelming success of their virtual workouts and local meetups, there were still barriers to overcome. One of the most significant hurdles was the skepticism that some seniors had toward the program. Despite the success stories they had gathered, there were still many who weren't ready to believe that their bodies could get stronger, that they could transform at any age. To some, it seemed impossible. These were the people John and Frankie needed to reach the most, yet they were the hardest to convince. It's frustrating, Frankie said one afternoon as they sat in the office, reviewing the feedback from their latest campaign. We've got testimonials from people in their 80s who are lifting weights and improving their mobility. But there are still so many who don't believe it's possible for them. John rubbed his temples, thinking through the challenge. We've built a solid base of followers, but we need to reach those who are still sitting on the sidelines. I get it, they're scared. They've lived with the belief that age means weakness. But how do we break through that mental barrier? Frankie was quiet for a moment, her eyes scanning the wall of success stories in front of her. Then it clicked. What if we flipped the script? Instead of focusing on how people can get stronger, we show them how easy it is to take that first step. We make the barrier to entry as low as possible. What if we start showing seniors just how simple and accessible it is to begin? John's eyes lit up. Like baby steps. A program where the first phase is literally just about getting up and moving, even for people who can barely walk. We could emphasize the mindset shift. That movement is the key to strength, not lifting heavy weights. It was an intriguing thought. John and Frankie had always emphasized the gradual process of strength building, but now, they needed to meet people where they were. Instead of talking about lifting dumbbells or doing burpees, they would show people how important it was to simply start by moving their bodies. Small steps, big results. They decided to reframe the introductory portion of Strength of Will, making it more accessible. They began to emphasize activities that focused on increasing mobility, like standing up from a chair multiple times in a row or walking short distances, with rest breaks in between. It was about getting comfortable with movement again. But the real challenge, as always, was getting people to take that first step. Weeks passed, and the changes started to show. They introduced a new series of videos titled, First Step Forward, where Frankie demonstrated easy-to-follow exercises that didn't require any special equipment or intense effort. The aim was to get seniors to feel empowered by small victories, standing up from a chair, reaching overhead, walking to the mailbox and back. And for those who felt intimidated, they were able to get started from the comfort of their own homes. But there were still some who hesitated, who watched from the sidelines, unsure whether they could actually do it. One afternoon, John got an email that caused him to pause. It was from an elderly woman named Marguerite, who had been following the program but hadn't yet participated. "I've seen the results from others," the email began. "But I don't think it's for me. I've spent most of my life sitting on the sidelines. My knees hurt too much, and my back is so stiff. I'm too old to start something like this. I'm afraid I'll just make things worse." John stared at the screen, feeling a pang of empathy for Marguerite. It was exactly what they were up against, the mental barrier that made people feel like they were too far gone to start something new, something positive. He thought about how much he had heard this sentiment from others: "I'm too old, too weak, too set in my ways." He wanted to help her, but how? The answer came to him the next day, during a conversation with Frankie. What if we shared a personal story from someone in a similar situation? What if we showed them that it's okay to start small, to be vulnerable? Marguerite doesn't need a big transformation right now, she just needs a nudge, a belief that it's possible, he said. Frankie's eyes sparkled. That's the key. We need to tell stories that make people feel seen and heard. We don't need to promise massive change in a month. We just need to let them know that change is possible, even a little change can make a big difference. With this new approach in mind, John and Frankie decided to create a video featuring an older gentleman, Bill, who had struggled with chronic back pain for years. Bill's story was one of perseverance, but also vulnerability. He shared how, at first, he had felt too weak to even walk around his home, let alone attempt exercise. Yet, through the Strength of Will program, he had started with small movements and gradually built up his strength. It was a slow process, but Bill was now able to enjoy long walks with his grandchildren, something he had feared he'd never do again. Bill's story is powerful, John said as they reviewed the final cut. It's not just about the physical results. It's about how he took back control of his life. When the video was released, the response was immediate. Emails flooded in, not just from people interested in the program, but from others who felt encouraged by Bill's honesty and strength. They too were ready to take that first step forward. Marguerite was one of those people. A few weeks later, she sent a follow-up email. "I started with your first step forward video. I only did the chair exercises at first, but now I can stand for 5 minutes at a time without pain. I never thought it was possible, but here I am. Thank you for showing me that I'm not too old to make a change." For John and Frankie, it was a moment of realization. Breaking through barriers wasn't just about providing more information or a more advanced program. It was about meeting people where they were, validating their fears and struggles, and offering them a gentle push to try something new. The more personal and relatable the stories, the more people would be willing to step outside of their comfort zone. As the program continued to grow, John and Frankie learned that breaking barriers wasn't just about pushing people to their physical limits, it was about showing them that every small victory, every movement, was an accomplishment in itself. The excitement of their rapidly growing program was undeniable. Every day, John and Frankie saw more faces joining the Strength of Will movement, more people sharing their success stories, and more testimonials flooding in. Yet as they continued to build momentum, they knew that the true test of their work would not come from the initial spark of interest, but from sustaining that interest over time. "John, it's been over a year now," Frankie said one evening as they reviewed their latest data. "And we're seeing growth, sure. But how do we keep this going? How do we keep people engaged long-term?" John nodded, his mind racing through possibilities. The initial novelty of a new program was exciting, but long-term commitment? That was a different beast entirely. "You're right," John said, leaning back in his chair. The first few months, people were excited because it was new. But now? We need to find ways to make the program a part of their lives, a routine they can't live without. As they discussed their options, the challenge became clear: it wasn't just about getting seniors to start, it was about keeping them motivated to continue. It was about making the Strength of Will program something they would stick with for years, not just a quick fix. Frankie, ever the strategist, had an idea. "What if we add more variety to the program? We need to make sure people don't plateau. There's a huge risk of burnout when the exercises become repetitive. Maybe we should add new challenges each month, change up the routines to keep it fresh." John's face lit up. "That's it. New challenges. Let's build a structure that rewards progress, where every month feels like a new achievement. But we also have to remind them why they started in the first place. That's the key." With this in mind, they revamped the Strength of Will program to include themed challenges, monthly check-ins, and progress tracking. Each month, they introduced a new focus, like balance improvement, mobility, or endurance. Participants could earn badges for completing certain milestones, keeping them motivated and invested in their progress. The goal was to create a sense of accomplishment while ensuring that the program stayed dynamic, fun, and challenging. The new changes were a hit. In the following months, more participants stayed engaged. They were more invested in their personal growth, setting new goals for themselves each month. John and Frankie were excited, but they also knew that the true measure of success would come in a year or two, when the novelty of the program had worn off, and their clients would be relying on it not just for physical strength, but for emotional and mental resilience. That test came sooner than expected. A few months into the new structure, Frankie noticed a decline in engagement. Participation in the monthly challenges had started to dip. Some long-time members, who had initially been active, were now skipping workouts or expressing frustration that they weren't seeing progress as quickly as before. "John, we need to address this," Frankie said, concern in her voice. "Some of our core group is starting to lose steam. We can't let this happen." John felt a knot form in his stomach. They had built something special, but the challenge of keeping people engaged long-term was more difficult than they had imagined. They decided to hold a webinar for their Strength of Will community. John and Frankie would host a live session, talking about the struggles of long-term fitness and how it wasn't just about the exercises, it was about a mindset shift, a lifestyle transformation. During the webinar, John spoke candidly to their audience. "Listen, we get it. Long-term fitness isn't easy. You'll hit plateaus. You'll have days where you don't feel like getting out of bed, let alone lifting weights or walking those extra steps. But here's the thing, the progress you've made is not just about the number of push-ups you can do or the weight you can lift. It's about how you've changed your mindset. You've proven that you can push through the hard days. You've shown up for yourself." As John spoke, the responses started pouring in. People weren't just listening, they were engaging. Many shared their struggles, admitting that they had fallen off track. But just as many expressed their commitment to keep going, despite the obstacles. The support within the community was palpable. One woman wrote, "I've been struggling with staying motivated lately, but hearing you talk about how progress isn't just physical, it's mental, really hit home for me. I'm going to stick with it. I'm not giving up now." Frankie smiled as she read the messages. That's what it's all about, isn't it? It's about resilience. It's not about how many days we feel strong, it's about how many days we decide to keep going, even when it's hard. In the weeks that followed, the community seemed to reinvigorate itself. The key, John and Frankie realized, was reminding people that setbacks were part of the journey. It wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up. And the more they shared this message, the more their community embraced it. They also found that the longer people stuck with the program, the more they began to see the mental and emotional benefits of their physical strength. Seniors were reporting better sleep, reduced anxiety, and improved moods. Strength of Will had become more than a fitness program, it had become a tool for mental wellness. John and Frankie continued to emphasize the value of consistency over perfection. And over time, the program adapted. They added features like mindfulness practices, nutrition advice, and even life coaching webinars, helping seniors focus not only on physical strength but on their overall well-being. Months later, as John sat down to review the data, he was filled with pride. Not only had Strength of Will endured the test of time, but it had also evolved. It had become more than just a fitness movement. It was a holistic approach to aging, one that allowed people to live fully, regardless of their age. As Frankie walked into the room, John looked up and smiled. "We've done it. We've created something that's built to last." She grinned. "The test of time is just the beginning. Let's keep pushing forward." As Strength of Will continued to grow, John and Frankie were starting to realize that their program had reached something even more profound than they had initially anticipated. It wasn't just a fitness movement anymore. It had become a community, a living, breathing force of its own, full of unique stories and powerful transformations. And now, John and Frankie found themselves focusing on a central question that had become increasingly important: how do you build a community that thrives on the power of individual stories, on personal achievements, on one person's journey? It all started with a message from a participant named Harold. At first glance, Harold's story wasn't any more extraordinary than the hundreds of others they received every week. He was in his late 70s, had been living with arthritis for years, and had struggled with mobility. But Harold's message was different. It wasn't just a success story. It was a plea for connection. "I've been following Strength of Will for a few months now," Harold wrote. "I've made progress, but I feel like I'm still missing something. The exercises help, but something's not clicking for me. I need to know that what I'm doing matters. I don't have a family nearby. I'm not doing this just for myself, I want to feel like I'm part of something bigger. Can you help me?" John stared at the email for a long moment, his heart heavy with empathy. He could hear Harold's loneliness in those words. It wasn't about the physical transformation for Harold, it was about the emotional and social connection. Harold wasn't alone in this need. He was speaking for so many others who had begun this journey alone, without the encouragement of loved ones nearby. Frankie, who had come to sit beside him, read the email as well. "This is exactly what we've been talking about. People want to feel like they're not just working out. They want to know that they matter. They want to feel seen." John's mind raced. There had to be a way to turn Harold's struggle into an opportunity for growth, not just for him but for everyone who felt the same way. What if the answer was to shift the focus back to the individual, but also to weave those individual stories into something much bigger? What if we start focusing on the power of one person's journey within our community? John said suddenly, his eyes lighting up. What if we told each person's story and made it central to the larger narrative of Strength of Will? We could showcase Harold's journey, for example, and how even one person can create ripples that affect an entire community. Frankie was already on board with the idea. "Yes. Let's make it about personal milestones. Not just the big transformations, but the small, everyday victories. We could create spotlight stories, where we feature individual journeys and show how those individual steps can inspire everyone." And so, they did. The first person they spotlighted was Harold. They filmed a short documentary-style video that focused on his struggles and successes, on how he had felt isolated at the start of his journey but had gradually found confidence and strength. They didn't just focus on the exercises he was doing or the progress he had made physically. They highlighted the emotional aspects of his transformation, the sense of connection he had found within the community, and how the smallest victories, like being able to walk without pain for the first time in years, had made a huge difference. When the video aired, something magical happened. The feedback was overwhelming. In the comments, people shared their own struggles with loneliness and how Harold's story resonated with them. Many of them said they had been feeling disconnected, but seeing someone like Harold make a real, tangible change gave them hope. One person wrote, "I've been stuck for so long. I haven't been able to take that first step. But watching Harold take his journey made me realize that I'm not alone. I'm going to start today. If he can do it, so can I." Another wrote, "I don't have family nearby either. I understand Harold's need for connection. Thank you for showing that we're not just doing this for ourselves. We're part of something bigger." John and Frankie were ecstatic. It was clear that the Strength of Will community was more than just a fitness program. It had become a support system, a place where people could see themselves reflected in others, and where the power of individual stories could inspire change in ways they hadn't even considered. But Harold's story was just the beginning. The more they shared individual stories, the more the community came to life. They began to build a culture where the personal was always intertwined with the collective. One day, Frankie came into the office, holding a piece of paper with an email from a woman named Linda. "You've got to see this," she said, passing it over to John. Linda's email was just as heartfelt as Harold's, but this time, she was sharing something even deeper. She had been inspired by Harold's journey and had decided to take the leap herself. But instead of simply starting the program on her own, she had reached out to her local senior community center, offering to start a Strength of Will group. "I want to start a group of my own," Linda wrote. "I'm not a trainer, but I know how important it is for people like me to feel connected. I'm not asking for anything in return, I just want to give back. What do you think?" John read the email and smiled. This is exactly what we needed. It's one person, one story, leading to more connections. Linda's idea is perfect. We can start small, community hubs. People like her can help spread the message, build their own groups, and create their own support systems. They decided to create a special section on their website where people could learn how to start their own Strength of Will groups in their local communities. This wasn't just about virtual or online connections anymore. It was about empowering people to take the principles of Strength of Will and create their own networks. These local leaders, like Linda, would be able to offer support to others and create personal relationships that kept people motivated, even when the going got tough. The impact was immediate. Soon, John and Frankie were receiving messages from all over the country, from seniors who had taken the initiative to form their own groups. What began as one individual's journey, Harold's, Linda's, and many others, had grown into a collective force, a movement of seniors helping seniors, one story at a time. Through these small, individual steps, Strength of Will had evolved into something far greater than just a fitness program. It had become a community built on the power of one. One person's story could change the course of many others. The power of one continued to ripple through the Strength of Will community. What started as individual transformations was now a vast network of connections, built on shared experiences, mutual support, and a sense of belonging. John and Frankie could hardly keep up with the growing number of local groups springing up around the country. Each one had its own character, its own leader, its own heartbeat. But they were all connected by one central mission: to empower seniors to take control of their physical and mental well-being. As John and Frankie traveled to various cities to check in on these local hubs, they were awed by the strength of the bonds they witnessed. One group in particular stood out, a small gathering of seniors in Portland, Oregon, who had been meeting weekly at their local senior center. The group was led by Linda, the same woman who had been inspired by Harold's story to start her own local Strength of Will chapter. Linda had become more than just a community leader, she had become a symbol of hope for everyone involved. Her ability to connect with others and make them feel like they were part of something bigger was infectious. What had started as a simple fitness group was now a close-knit family of seniors who supported each other through thick and thin. "We've come a long way," Linda told John and Frankie during their visit. "At first, it was just a few of us, but now we're a community. We meet for the workouts, but we also share meals, celebrate birthdays, and look out for each other. We've got each other's backs." As the group began their morning workout session, John and Frankie observed with pride. What was once a group of seniors with limited mobility and apprehension was now filled with energy, laughter, and a sense of purpose. There was something special about this group. It wasn't just the physical transformation that had occurred, but the emotional and psychological shift that had taken place. These seniors weren't just stronger physically, they were stronger emotionally and mentally as well. After the session, they gathered in the community room for a post-workout snack. Linda stood at the front, beaming as she introduced John and Frankie to the group. "I want to introduce you all to the people who helped make this possible," she said. "These two, John and Frankie, believed in me, believed in us, and because of them, we've been able to transform not just our bodies, but our lives." The room erupted in applause. It was clear to John and Frankie that this wasn't just a fitness program anymore. It was a lifeline. It had given people a sense of identity and purpose that many of them had been missing in their later years. Afterward, John and Frankie took a walk with Linda, reflecting on everything they had witnessed. "You were right," John said, looking out over the group. "It's not just about muscle strength. It's about resilience and emotional strength. What these people have here, these bonds, they're unbreakable." Linda smiled, nodding. "We're a family now. And that's what makes the difference. When people feel connected, they can achieve so much more. I've seen people here who were once isolated, afraid, or depressed. Now they're thriving, and it's because of the support they've found here." As John and Frankie left Portland, they couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at what they had helped create. It wasn't just about fitness. It was about creating a network that provided people with what they needed most: connection, support, and the belief that they could do anything, no matter their age. But their journey wasn't over yet. The more they traveled, the more they realized that they were only scratching the surface. These small, local hubs were proof of what was possible, but the future of strength will lay in the ability to scale this model, not just across the country, but worldwide. And yet, they knew it wasn't going to be easy. They needed to preserve what made each group unique, while also ensuring that the program maintained its integrity and core values. "I've been thinking a lot about the future," Frankie said one evening, sitting across from John in their hotel room. "I don't want to lose the sense of community that makes Strength of Will so special. We can't just turn this into a franchise, or a business. It has to remain about the people." John nodded, his mind working through the possibilities. "You're right. The community aspect has to stay at the forefront. We can scale, but we can't lose the personal touch." They both knew that the heart of Strength of Will was the deep, emotional connections between people, the way it brought them together and allowed them to feel seen and valued. As they sat there, brainstorming ways to maintain this feeling on a larger scale, they realized that the answer wasn't in how big the program could become, but in how they could nurture the relationships that had already blossomed. The next step was clear: they would have to bring in local leaders like Linda from each community to help manage and guide new hubs. They could offer support, share best practices, and ensure that the core principles of the program were upheld. They would create a Strength of Will leadership network, a group of passionate individuals who understood the power of community and were dedicated to helping others experience the transformation that had been sparked in them. But there was one more key piece they hadn't fully explored yet: technology. As much as they valued the personal connections, they realized that they could use tech to amplify those relationships. Virtual support groups, community forums, and even online challenges would allow participants to stay connected, no matter where they lived. "We've got to build a stronger virtual platform," John said, tapping his pen on the table. "It's time to take what we've created offline and bring it into the digital world. That way, People who can't make it to in-person groups will still feel like they're part of something. Frankie agreed. The future is in combining the best of both worlds, the personal connection and the technology that brings us closer. As they discussed these next steps, they realized that what they were building wasn't just a fitness program. It was a global movement, one that empowered people not only to transform their bodies, but also to create unbreakable bonds that would last a lifetime. John and Frankie stood at the edge of the grand auditorium, where a sea of faces waited, eager and full of anticipation. The event they had planned, a nationwide Strength of Will convention, was about to begin. What had started as a small idea to transform seniors' health had now blossomed into something far beyond their expectations, a movement, a revolution. And this convention would serve as the culmination of everything they had worked for. The event was a testament to their journey, the highs, the lows, and everything in between. It wasn't just about celebrating physical strength anymore. It was about celebrating the emotional and mental strength that had carried each person through their own journey. This was a celebration of the bonds forged in the fires of adversity, and the unbreakable spirit that had carried them forward. John looked around at the crowd, at the faces that had once been strangers, now familiar, now friends. He saw Harold, who had started it all. He saw Linda, the leader of the Portland group, who had helped thousands of others find their way. And he saw thousands of others whose lives had been touched by strength of will. "This is it," John whispered to Frankie. "We've done it. We've really done it." Frankie smiled, but there was a glint in her eyes. "It's not over yet. This is just the beginning. We've built something lasting, something that will continue to grow, even when we're not here." As the event kicked off, John and Frankie took to the stage. They had decided to keep their speech simple, but meaningful. The audience wasn't there for the glitz or the grandiose speeches. They were there because they had lived the journey, because they understood what it meant to be part of something bigger than themselves. John began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "When we first started Strength of Will, we had one goal in mind, to help seniors transform their lives, not just their bodies, but their minds, their spirits, their sense of purpose. What we didn't anticipate was the way you all would transform us. We came here thinking we would help you, but it's clear now that you've helped us more than we ever could have imagined. You've taught us the true meaning of resilience, the power of community, and the incredible strength of the human spirit." The crowd erupted into applause. John paused for a moment, taking in the warmth of their response. Frankie continued. "You've shown us that Strength of Will is more than a program. It's a movement. It's not about what we can do for you, it's about what we can do together. Each of you is part of this journey. Each of you has contributed to this legacy. And together, we've created something that will last, something that will inspire future generations." The room was electric, filled with energy and emotion. Every face in the crowd was beaming with pride, not just because of the progress they had made individually, but because of the collective progress they had all achieved together. But as the applause died down and the crowd settled, John and Frankie knew that the true impact of Strength of Will had yet to be fully realized. They had built something far bigger than themselves, and they had no intention of letting it fade away. "The legacy of Strength of Will," John continued, "is not just about what we've accomplished. It's about what you all will continue to accomplish. It's about the future of this movement, the leaders you've become, the communities you've built, and the example you've set for generations to come. We're not just talking about strength in our bodies. We're talking about strength in our communities, in our relationships, and in our ability to face life's challenges with courage and hope." Frankie added, "We've created something that will never be taken away. It's not just a fitness program, it's a philosophy, a way of life. And it will continue to grow as long as there's someone willing to lead, willing to help, and willing to share their story." And that was the moment Strength of Will truly came full circle. It wasn't just about the food, the exercises, or the physical transformations. It was about the relationships built along the way. It was about people showing up for each other, not just for themselves. It was about building a culture of strength, community, and hope, and making it clear that no matter the obstacles, together, anything was possible. As the event came to a close, John and Frankie shared one last moment of reflection. "You know, it's been an incredible journey," John said. "We've seen people overcome things they thought they couldn't. We've seen lives change in ways that go far beyond anything we could have expected. And that's the true power of this movement." Frankie smiled, her eyes full of gratitude. "And it's not over. This is just the beginning. We've built something that will live on in the hearts and minds of every person who's been a part of it. It's not about us anymore. It's about all of you. And you'll carry this legacy forward." As they stood there, looking out at the crowd, John and Frankie realized that the real revolution had been the transformation they had witnessed not just in the body, but in the spirit. They had helped create something that would endure long after the last workout was completed, something that would leave a legacy of strength, compassion, and connection for generations to come. The last words of their speech echoed through the auditorium. "Thank you for being part of the revolution. You are strength of will. And together, we are unstoppable." The applause that followed was deafening. And in that moment, John and Frankie knew that the legacy they had started would live on forever. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?